Lis Pimentel is the president of Unite Here Local 75 and has worked for Unite Here, the international union, since 1999 in various jurisdictions throughout North America, and she's also the chair of the Fair B&B Coalition.
My name is Lis Pimentel. I'm the president of Unite Here Local 75 in the GTA. We represent hotel workers, gaming workers, and institutional food service workers. Our union represents around 300,000 hospitality workers around North America, basically broken up into like 1/3 hotel workers, 1/3 gaming workers, 1/3 institutional food service. And I say that just because I think it'll become kind of important in the chapter. I haven't, I'll confess, I've not read the whole book, but I've read enough of it to find some things that I think are really useful and, and that speak to me, I think, in terms of where the labor movement can go in cities. So one of the, for those who haven't read it yet, one of the things that it talks about is the fact that cities provide sort of an interesting space for unions to engage in social unionism, coalition building, just the density and the populations and the diversity of the populations living in cities just provides really unique opportunities to build something larger kind of social movement. This is something that for our union is, that's exactly how we understand the labor movement. That's exactly who we want to be. We're very, very focused in urban centers because that's where the hospitality industry, gains most of its cash flow. We want to be able to shut that cash flow down if we need to in order to raise standards for hospitality workers. And so, we think almost exclusively about cities as like the site of struggle to build a high standard for working class people. So the labor movement, I think we all probably in this room are going like, what's the way forward, right? There's been decline in some areas and whatever, and how do we win? I very much agree that we need to think very creatively and outside the box and sort of, in a broader social movement kind of orientation if we're going to rebuild not just the labor movement, but sort of the left in general. And we see ourselves very consciously as part of trying to be part of that project. Another point that the book makes that I very much agree with is that, as we're doing this work, the strategies that we have available to us are very significantly limited by, or shaped, I think it says shaped, but I would say limited, by our relationship to other more powerful actors, right? We're not operating in a vacuum. We have to actually deal with who has power and who runs the government and these kinds of questions. And for us, we're not a very large union. We have about 20,000 members total in Canada. We have 8,500 total in the GTA. That does not make us one of the biggest union players on the landscape. And so, we have to think very carefully if we're going to build power for hospitality workers about how to position ourselves in an environment that is filled with all sorts of other actors, other unions, other employers, developers, all these people who actually, largely call the shots in terms of our fate, right? So that, I think, is an important point for us to kind of always keep in mind. The article is about it's about, I think, sort of one of the gaming debates that has happened here in the city of Toronto. There have been many, but it's sort of the most dramatic one that, ended in, crack scandal 2 days before the vote and a lot of drama. So it's the one we all kind of remember, but actually there's been a lot of other debates around gaming in this city and many others. So just to kind of contextualize it a little. So gaming, it's an industry that is largely thinking these days about how do we move closer to customers, right? How do we move closer to urban centers? And this is not just a Toronto question, it's a worldwide question. And so the debate around urban-based gaming is happening everywhere. And our experience in Unite Here with this kind of debate is that Basically, it'll go through various iterations. It'll be rejected 2 or 3 times, and then eventually it'll be approved. And that's been the experience of just about every city that we're in. So, whether it's Boston, or it's New York, or it's Baltimore, or it's New Orleans, or it's Detroit, or you name the city, if the debate has started there, within 10 or 12 years there will be gaming approvals. So that's just what we've seen. And so we think about it in terms of, okay, if there's some kind of inevitable approval here, what are the kinds of conditions that we can attach to these projects? Because of the obvious, there's social costs, there's a lot of different issues, right, around this industry. And to be clear, we're Unite here. We represent gaming workers and bartenders, and we're no Puritans. We're not super judgmental about these kinds of things, but still, we understand. Obviously, there's social costs, and if there are these developments, the benefits ought to outweigh the costs. If they don't, they're not worth doing, right? So the things we're thinking about all the time is good operators versus bad operators, right? There are many, many gaming companies that are extremely bad employers. Sheldon Adelson, Sands. We wanted to, and we still are very committed to keeping the bad operators out of our cities. And so, and again, in a framework where this is likely to be approved, how do you keep a Sheldon Adelson out of Toronto, right? That's a key priority of ours. How do we keep gaming operations out of cities or anywhere when they have no good conditions attached to them, right? So you're going to have costs attached to it. What are the benefits, right? If you just have a blanket approval for gaming with absolutely no conditions attached to it, why would we do that? Why would we do that? And so these are the kinds of things that we think about. So those are the negatives. The positive is it happens to be an industry that is highly, highly regulated. Lots and lots of approvals are required to get it done, right? And so those required approvals provide an opportunity for unions and community groups and a range of people to actually go, hey, we want to attach some conditions to this thing. And the more controversial the project, the more conditions you can put on it, right? So, we've seen on the kind of spectrum of things, there are cities that are in desperate economic straits who not only will attach no conditions to gaming, but in fact will hand over a bunch of money to gaming operators. Please come to our city and build something, right? And I can name a few cities like that. There are others that are on the other side that and I think we would be among them to say, we don't need gaming, but if it's going to come here, it better darn well have a bunch of conditions attached to it. We want good union jobs, we want community benefits, we want local hiring, we want training, we want, a number of things. So, there is kind of an opportunity in it. And I think it's a timely discussion because, sort of since that big debate, gaming expansion has been approved in Toronto, and it's going to occur, and it's, the RFP has closed, and the OLG is now, considering who the operator is going to be at Woodbine, and a master plan has been put forward for that space. And so we're kind of right in that moment again where we got to see how this thing is going to go. So the way that we engaged with this was basically how can we attach the maximum number of conditions to the project. And in the 2013 debate, I think we kind of were trying to carve out a space that's like yes with conditions. There were people who were no, people who were yes, but to kind of carve out some middle road to go, you know what, if you're going to say yes, there need to be conditions attached to it. We had already gone through a difficult debate in 2007 around the Woodbine project where really no meaningful conditions got attached to that. It got approved with no conditions. And we were kind of like, that's just not going to be okay. And now we're in a place where in 2015, the approvals did happen, and this time with conditions. So, I think it does kind of go to the point of how do we like, how do we maneuver in an environment where we don't necessarily have control over everything, but how do we use what little power we have to kind of influence the ultimate outcome of the project? So it's a challenging area for us, but something that we're kind of interested in figuring out how to do. So I guess I'll just pause there.
Thank you, Liz. Bob Hall, at the end, is a former president of IATSE Local 873. He has worked in the motion picture industry and was an active member of the union. He founded the local special effects department, and he was president of the local between 2005 and 2011, and continues to play an active role in the
Good morning to the attendees today and our authors and my fellow panel members. My name is Bob Hall. I formerly represented motion picture technician film workers in this city in the time of the big box studio struggle that was chronicled in Ian's book. There was a time in Toronto when there was no motion picture industry. I was fortunate in my time to come into it fairly early on and watched its curve in development, unique in the city and fairly demanding, but we found that over years we were able to build an industry within the city of Toronto that didn't exist. And in its evolution, we became aware that actually we were a manufacturing industry and that we were extremely before its time, green. Our factories were more often than not your city streets, your neighborhoods, sometimes your homes that you may have rented out, your front lawns. We found that wherever we went, we created at least attention and disruption. Not our intention, but it seemed to follow us around, and it was a newly emerging and creative industry. In any manufacturing industry, of course, you have factories. As I just described, some of ours were outside on your streets, but not always. We have a requirement for studios, and studios are our factories. That's, of course, I'm sure everyone is aware, where such epics of Pacific Rim, right down to your the Guiding Light was shot in studios, etc. And there are obvious requirement for a buoyant motion picture industry. We were not that until approximately 1984. The labor landscape transmuted in New York, and there was a movement to bring much production that at that time would have been originally shot in New York, but for a number of reasons it was not amenable to do so there, and subsequently the production came to Toronto. It looks very similar to New York, and what the heck, they've got an 84-cent dollar. Well, a very small industry. When I joined my union, IATSE, we're an International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees represented throughout North America, with affiliates and friends in the European industry as well. When we began to evolve, we realized that we needed some infrastructure within the city, and there were a few places left that were still amenable to such. Our new factories became the old factories that were becoming decommissioned, shut down, but provided ideal landscape for our employers, our producers, who we were in partnership in essence, to utilize. Well, when I joined our local in 1983, we had roughly 200 members. So you can imagine the size and scope of the industry at that time, not very large. But once again, as I described, we found ourselves working in the areas of the city that had previously been seen as the industrial lands. And the last remnants of the manufacturing plants and factories that were throughout the city. That gave me quite, through my eyes, a different perspective. I was there doing, my very specific work, but it did not, go past me that all the places that we were finding ourselves working in, previously represented the manufacturing hub of the city of Toronto. Having said that, we were fortunate for a number of years to enjoy successes by the productions that came to our town, virtue of the 84-cent dollar. We built an infrastructure in the city of entrepreneurs who saw the industry in a bigger light and proceeded to invest. They provided service companies, equipment, that expanded out to regular relationships with existing industry within the city. Our hotel hospitality friends at United here, they saw many of our people coming through and staying in the hotels. That was rising. The car rental agencies were becoming very challenged. They didn't have enough cars in the city as we expanded the little tail of our industry. I never thought when I started in that industry that I would see the remnants of the manufacturing that once was here and is no longer. The time that we evolved into when the big box replacement of studios landscape emerged circa 2007, we had now expanded into a fairly large union that, as I say, we built relationships throughout the city. Car rental agencies, hotels, many vendors that became regular suppliers to our industry. We would regularly see vans from all over Leslieville in that specific application, pulling in and dropping off baked goods, prop items rented, etc. Before our very eyes, we realized that suddenly our industry now is accepted and amalgamated within the broader aspect of the communities that we were using as our factories, whether that be, as I described earlier, the locations or the decommissioned factories. Our very first factories, so to speak, were the properties that became the issue for redevelopment for the big box store in Leslieville. It came to me originally at a time we were very challenged. We had recently suffered from the SARS issue in Toronto, which in our industry put a great deficit through. You can appreciate that I described, we started with 200 members, became 2,000 members. It was very precarious balance at that time. The work is transient. That's why we're using old decommissioned factories. We're not established like GM or other such factories. They come and go. So these spaces that we could work in were really intimate to our industry. Having said that, when the word came to me that there was a potential redevelopment of one of our main resources being in Leslieville, what it did signal at the time, as I've just stated, we were under a number of issues. Our industry could have disappeared in a night. We weren't all that long established, 50 years, somewhat transient, etc. The importance of the factories, of course, settled on me. What I was not in any way prepared for was the subsequent display of how our industry integrated throughout the whole community. My involvement followed the initial issue that was brought on, addressed by the community. The community themselves were up in arms that our facility would be shut down before we even actually heard about it in the bigger sense. We were dealing with other issues. We heard some of the rumblings. I got a call to meet with a number of people who were at that time aware of the issue. Paula Fletcher, one of our city councilors, it was, I believe, my first point of contact. And at that time I'm thinking, well, why am I meeting with city officials relative to my industry's issues? That was the beginning of the genesis of it. The long and the short is that the interest of the cities and various stakeholders, the Leslieville community, etc., were in the same focus. We had some discussions at the time. I remember meeting John Cartwright very early on, and his great assistant at that time, Julian Deutsch. And the main thing was, where do we go with this? How do we address this? And we realized that if we united a variety of unions that were actually had stakes in that corridor, may not be involved in the specific motion picture studio, but you had other various unions that were along there, that you would see what the contagion would be and would ultimately address their workplaces. We saw that if we pooled our resources, our various points of view, it might deflate what was being offered around that time, that the Leslieville people were elitists. They didn't want, people that might encourage a Walmart around, that the motion picture industry, although nice, is small and not very significant in this city, and quite frankly, who cares if it isn't there? It wasn't there a few years back. And the other stakeholders, that, like, if this gets redeveloped into big box, our factory is right next to yours, and next to yours, next to yours, and then more largely, where do we go? There's no employment lands left in the city. That became the clarion at the time. Certainly for me was, you know what? This has happened everywhere throughout this city, and these are the last bastions of it. And when such is redeveloped, this manufacturing is gone. That's one thing. But secondly, it just immediately impacts everybody in the community who came forward, who were part of the Leslieville community. We saw stakeholders that had small stores. We saw stakeholders that Evergreen, etc., that represented aspects of workers for the city, and they were all brought together under one umbrella to fight the same struggle. I was unaware how readily that was available through organization of the city, various unions, but most of all the community and the desire. It was really the coalition of the unions, the participation of the city, and the community itself that won the big box rezoning. Thank you.
John Cartwright is the president of Labour Council in Toronto. Many of you know him. If you can believe it, he's at an even earlier event than ours, but he promises to show up around 9 o'clock.
Well, good morning, everyone who got up bright and early to come to this thing. I'm late because I was at a 7 o'clock a.m. meeting first and then came here. I want to shout out to the participants on the panel here, because without Bob's leadership of IATSE, we would have never won that fight. And certainly Rick, doing the groundwork in Weston Mount Dennis was crucial to be able to actually have a labor community coalition. Because without that, the network there wouldn't have been a community side to that. It would have just been a few unions, talking out of our head. And of course, Liz and her amazing leadership with Local 75. And so we've not really worked together all that much, but childcare has been part of the big fight for our movement. Just to put it in context, what Bob was talking about, when we stopped Walmart coming onto Eastern Avenue, it was only the second time in North America that Walmart had been stopped from coming into a major urban center. The other one was in Inglewood, California, a suburb of Los Angeles, and the LA County Fed is the most powerful local labor council in North America. So we're feeling pretty good about stepping up to that level. But I want to say this. When I started reading the book and I read the introduction by Ian, I thought, man, this guy's been living inside my head for the last 20 years. Because, although I was born in London, Ontario, I moved to Scarborough when I was 13. I am somebody who loves this city to death, and I love what the working class in this city does day in and day out, and have done for a century and a half. And the fact that large cities not just Toronto, but every big city in North America, and I suppose, in fact, across the world, are in fact incubators of new forms of struggle. What the value of this book is to say, let's look at some of those very unique fights and imagine what they actually mean. We look at the fact, and if you were here yesterday in my introduction, we've come from 190 countries. We speak 100 languages in this city. We live in relative harmony, not by accident, not because some wise man decreed it. It's because of an intense struggle of the working class in this city to fight against division, to fight for inclusion, to organize unrepresented workers in a whole variety of ways, and to really commit to winning victories that will stand for the next generation and the generation after that. I was talking to an American friend yesterday who was saying, the difference between us here and the States. Well, since our inception, we've defined ourselves as a social union movement. South of the border, it's been defined as a union advantage movement. You join our union, you get something that's of advantage. And that was part of the debate over public health care. Because there was all kinds of unions in the States that said, no, we don't want that. We want that to be a union advantage. And time again, we can point to those areas of the social wage that we have won through collective political bargaining. All the public programs and other kinds of things, the services that are just deemed to be public services, but are in fact part of a social wage that the working class in GTA and Ontario and Canada have won. And childcare is a big piece of that, along with a whole number of other things. And the political bargaining around things that allow the film industry to prosper here, is an important part of our struggle as a labor movement around local economic development strategies that really work. It would be interesting to layer into this conversation some of the experience in Quebec, because the FTQ and the labor movements in Quebec have done much more thinking around local economic development, frankly, than we have in English Canada, to my knowledge. And so I look forward to a future book, Ian, that actually does some of that collaboration. I want to thank the authors, who some of you are here in this room, for your interest in what we do. So much of what working people do and achieve and win is not celebrated, is in fact not even chronicled. And so the fact you've taken the time to chronicle those studies, I just want to say thank you so much, because it really means a lot. Marvin Novick, who used to teach at Ryerson and who was actually the author of the Good Jobs for All Declaration, used to talk about his role as an intellectual. And he defined his role as helping to give the intellectual confidence to the working class to shape the future of their society. Just think about that for a second. I mean, we're in trade unions, we're in institutions. Those institutions, as Liz says, have many constraints of what we can do and how we achieve things. But for working people to have the confidence that they have the right answers, that they can actually shape a future, is incredibly important. It's part of the stance of a labor movement, the stance of a class as a whole. We can take this on and we have the answers. And too many times I sit in academic circles and people want to study us and not recognize the incredible wisdom that sits in working people who've come from everywhere and bring that incredible knowledge of struggle, knowledge of culture, knowledge of solidarity into this incredible mix. So our labor movement says you got to have three things to succeed. You've got to have a strategy that has to be deeply thought through. What are the forces at play? Where do you want to get 5 and 10 years from now? Who's your opponents? Who's your potential friends? And really work through that strategy. And Rob Fairley has written a book on Campaign Planning Guide, which is our Bible, because it really unpacks how an organization builds strong strategy. And the second thing we need is engagement of members. Because without that, there's a few union staffers and a couple of volunteer leaders, who are trying to get something done. They don't have power. Power only comes when people are engaged in activity, in struggle itself. And the third piece is an alliance policy. I don't say coalitions. Coalitions are part of an alliance policy. An alliance policy is a long-term, deep relationship building between the union, possibly other unions in its sector or in its community, community people who live in the area that they're trying to work on. For us, that can be everything from the Toronto Environmental Alliance, the Social Planning Toronto, the Urban Alliance on Race Relations to ACORN. Those are our long-term, like years-long alliances where we've got their back and they've got ours. And then there could be coalitions built around a particular struggle. And the coalition on the Big Box store was really fascinating. There was some wonderful community leaders that stepped up and gave voice to that work. And then others in the sector. And sometimes those are, Bob used the term partnerships, between some of our employers. And I come out of the construction industry. That's the common parlance in our industry. The question, of course, is whether or not you walk into that partnership fully conscious of your class interests and fully conscious of the employer's interests, where those should align and where you have to part ways. And that's crucial to building those kinds of coalitions. And finally, the political allies. And the fact that we spend a lot of time electing champions to city council and school boards, as well as working at provincial and federal levels to elect champions, we can see the difference it makes. You think back to the Flint, Michigan, the famous launch of industrial unionism. Well, it was the fact that the governor did not allow the National Guard to be called in there and bust that strike made a huge difference. You look at places like Winnipeg, the fact that city council and others were pro-labor made some differences. And we can come back to this, all of these sites, in fact, and the role of individual political champions to open up doors in city council, or in the case of the Weston Mount Dennis, in fact, into the provincial decision-making process. I want to come back to chronicling. Jane McAlevy's latest book, No Shortcuts. We bought a box of her first book and gave it to all our leaders and all our staff because we think that the way that she imagines how do you engage members and move them into leadership is a really useful lesson, because we have good labor laws. A lot of our organizations don't have to do that tough work of really talking about their members. They get the dues. They have meetings. Oh, there's no quorum at a meeting. That's fine. But how do you actually go down and deeply engage people is crucial. But the reason I'm mentioning the second book is because she takes, particularly the Smithfield fight, she takes fights that aren't well known and lifts them up as a teachable moment for working people in the States and in Canada. I was at the Change to Win founding convention, the organizing convention, when an African-American brother who was a leader in that Smithfield fight got up and talked about his day-to-day flipping a hog carcass. How many times a minute? Like 5 times a minute for 8 hours, a hog carcass weighing 200, 300 pounds. And the courage of that, that fight, and then building that coalition, building that alliance to succeed. So she's done it for the States. Ian, you've helped pull it together a little bit for part of Canada. But I would encourage those who are in the audience from the academic world to do more of it, to look at some of the amazing victories that we've won in Toronto. And we will shortly have to be chronicling the fight for 15 victory in Ontario, some of the labor law ELSA changes that are in Ontario. We would not have had contract flipping as part of these changes without the tremendous fight of the food service workers that Liz's local union led, winning $15 at the U of T Scarborough, at York, and then saying, so what happens now? The next time those universities open up this contract, is Aramark going to lose it because they're paying 15 plus dental for part-timers, and somebody's going to come and undercut. Similarly, in the grocery fight, when Unifor went out and said $15 an hour is part of our core strategy, and they had to build that fight. Similarly, the fight of Society of Energy Professionals, 4 years to support the efforts of Legal Aid Ontario lawyers to get a union when that's illegal, but they got it done. So there's a whole bunch of things here that invite recognition and articulating. Everything we do as a Labour Council, we are the largest in Canada. We are blessed with more resources than many federations of labour, is grounded in a class race, and gender analysis. And I want to leave you with that. Because if we're only looking at a piece of it, we're not doing our job. When we saw the issue around the community benefits and the fight around Metrolinx, we said, well, hold on a second. We've drawn the expertise from all across North America, and that's about the trades. And in spite of our best efforts, trades are still a pretty gendered thing. The best we've had is 3 or 4% sisters in the trades. So we went back to the government and said, we want to have a balance here. So for every 2 people on a construction site, there's somebody in an office designing, doing finance, contract compliance, clerical, blah, 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 blah. Let's make that a target as well. So we've created a pipeline for professional, admin, and technical jobs, and most of the people who get those benefits are women, and most of them are women of color. So whenever we're taking on this struggle, we have to look at that. We say that in Toronto we have 3 crises. We have a jobs crisis of youth unemployment from 17-18%. We have a climate crisis, and we have an equity crisis. And our movement can never be satisfied until we come up with solutions that address all 3 at the same time. Thank you very much.